On an asteroid where entire floors never breathed the same air, the simple scent of fried dough once brought elevators to a halt, triggered a stampede, and forced the authorities to prepare the liquidation of their own creature to disperse the crowd. The strangest part began later. The beast, which everyone considered a weapon against panic, was not hunting people. It was trying to escape the smell of a human kitchen. And while the automation locked down the levels one by one, only the ship's cook noticed what neither the guards, nor the administration, nor the entire city's system understood. A fastening strap slipped from its grip at the very moment a local technician screamed, as if the food container were a reactor. "Not with your hands!" The captain held the heavy crate with his shoulder and looked up irritably. Above the dock, the airflow arrows were flashing. Separate ones for the upper levels, separate for the middle, separate for the lower levels. It seemed even the dust here was required to know its own floor. "It's falling," the captain said. "The machine isn't holding it. Still, not with your hands." The container finally settled into place. The scent of fried dough, oil, and spices wafted through the dock. It was very faint. For the crew of the Orion, it smelled like the end of a long voyage and a proper dinner. For the locals, it did not. Several passers-by immediately quickened their pace. The tech nervously checked the sensor readings and only then allowed himself to exhale. The city inside the asteroid lived in layers. You could feel it even before anyone started explaining the rules. Different signs, different elevator colors, different cargo routes. No one forbade meeting directly, but everything around was arranged so that meetings happened as seldom as possible. "The containers are overheated by 2 degrees, the tech reported. "They're from the kitchen, not a cryo chamber." Marta, the ship's cook, replied. "Dough doesn't like the cold." The tech looked at her with an expression as if she had confessed to a crime. The captain sighed. "How long until unloading?" "If the system confirms air isolation, 18 minutes. And if it doesn't, we wait." "For how long?" "Until it confirms." That was what irritated him most of all, not the rules. Rules can be useful. What irritated him was that no one cared about the people inside those rules. Behind him, one of the crew's loaders was rubbing his neck. "He needs rest after the shift," the captain said. The tech blinked. "Does that pertain to the unloading?" "If he collapses from exhaustion, it pertains." No answer followed. The unloading crawled onward. The containers moved through narrow service corridors toward the upper sector elevators, where humans and a few other species lived, who were indifferent to the smells of food. At the next turn, the automation froze again. The captain knelt by a technical panel. "Don't touch that," the tech said instantly. "I'm just looking." In a niche behind the panel lay an old work glove, worn, rugged, real. It looked so out of place here that the captain initially thought someone had lost it a few hours ago. Then he noticed the layer of dust. The glove had been lying there for a long time. He wanted to ask, but the tech had already hastily closed the service cover, too hastily, as if he had seen something indecent. A few minutes later, Tallow appeared, the tall official from the port administration. "Air readings are unstable," he announced without a greeting. "One container must be additionally sealed." "Which one exactly?" "The one with the spices." Marta gave a dissatisfied snort. "They're already vacuum sealed." "It's not enough." "For whom?" Tallow looked at her. "For the city." The argument continued for another quarter of an hour. About the temperature, about the pressure inside the packaging, about the freight elevator's route, about the direction of the ventilation currents. Every little detail met resistance, every single one. And gradually, the captain began to notice something else. The people around them weren't nervous because of the cargo itself. They were nervous because of the smell. When the next container was opened to check the seals, there was immediate movement in the corridor. Someone left. Someone started making calls. 2 maintenance workers hastily closed their face filters. "What's going on?" the captain asked. Tallow didn't answer immediately. "The lower levels have received complaints." "From the smell of food?" "From the signal." "What signal?" Tallow looked at him with a long stare. "To you, it is food. For other floors, it has a different meaning." Before the captain could ask anything else, a red emergency indicator strip streaked across the ceiling. Everyone froze. Somewhere deep behind the walls, heavy shutters began to groan. One of the technicians turned deathly pale. No, no, it's too early. Tallow was already speaking to someone over the comms. Briefly, very quickly. The calm voice of the system echoed from the speakers. Interlevel contamination of the air circuit detected. Localization initiated. Contamination? The cook protested indignantly. It's the smell of donuts. No one laughed. A map of the asteroid flashed onto a nearby screen. Several lower sectors were blinking yellow, then red. People were running through the corridors. It was visible even on the schematic. Why are they panicking? The captain asked. The answer didn't come from Tallow. It came from the junior technician, who had been silent this whole time. Because this smell appears before a release. Before the release of what? The tech realized he had said too much and fell silent. At that moment, the city jolted. Somewhere, another cutoff valve tripped. The elevators stopped. Emergency bulkhead doors began to slide shut right in the middle of the walkways. New red zones flared up on the map. Tallow slowly lowered his communicator. For the first time, alarm appeared in his voice. The lower levels are reporting a crush. The scent of fried dough still hung in the air of the dock. A completely ordinary smell, but the entire perfectly organized city reacted to it as if something from the past had suddenly returned. Something they preferred not to talk about here. The floor beneath their feet shuddered so violently that one of the containers slid off its locks and slammed into the wall. The lights in the dock flickered. New evacuation routes immediately flashed on the ceiling, but the arrows contradicted each other. Green ones led to the elevators, while red ones blocked those same corridors a second later. Messages from 3 different levels poured out of the service speakers. Barrier 7 breached. Crowd flow is changing direction. The entity is losing its bearings. That last phrase sounded strange. It was as if the system itself didn't understand what was happening. Tallow turned sharply to the technicians. Who gave the command to open Sector 3? The lower levels requested an emergency release. Someone answered over the link. Crowd pressure was rising too fast. Another shockwave rolled through the asteroid's structure. This time, it was somewhere far below. Even through the floors, they could feel the mass. The cook slowly set a crate down on the floor. What did they release down there? No one answered right away. On the central screen, the map of the lower levels jittered. A massive yellow marker was moving across it. It wasn't heading toward the people. On the contrary, it was thrashing between corridors, smashing through partitions and service doors. It's moving away from the crowds, the captain muttered. That's impossible, Tallow said quickly. The reaction should be the opposite. From below came a crash so loud it sounded as if a cargo module had been dropped down an elevator shaft. Then a strange voice cut through the comms. The entity is attempting to move upward. I repeat, upward. Silence fell over the dock. Even the local technicians exchanged glances. It never goes up, said the young operator at the panel. He realized immediately that he had said too much. Tallow was already speaking into his communicator again. Seal all vertical routes. Immediately, and disable manual access to the ventilation. The captain turned his head. Why? Because your cargo has already entered the general system. We know that already. No, you don't understand the scale. For the first time, the official looked tired rather than irritated, like a man who had maintained order for too long through nothing but instructions. If the lower levels decide this is a deliberate attack, contact with humans will be frozen before the shift even ends. And if you panic now, it'll happen even faster, the cook snapped. One of the screens switched to the internal cameras of the lower sector. The captain expected to see a hunt. Instead, the massive creature slammed its side into an emergency grate and tried to squeeze into a technical passage that was far too narrow. The gray body was trembling. Its head moved constantly from side to side. It had no eyes at all, only thick folds of skin and wide vibration plates along its neck. It struck the partition again. Not because it was attacking. It was missing its mark. It's blind, the captain said softly. It senses movement, scent, and air pressure, Tallow replied. Usually that is enough. The creature jerked back sharply as a draft from the ventilation pulled from a side corridor. Then it emitted a short, low sound and dashed further, almost blindly. There, the cook said. She stepped closer to the screen. Did you see that? See what exactly? The official asked irritably. It's not shying away from people. It's the airflow. Marta jabbed a finger at the ventilation diagram next to the camera. That line comes from our kitchen sector. Tallow didn't even look. Enough. The containers will be isolated and destroyed after inspection. Destroyed? The cook stared at him. That's food. Right now, it's a source of panic. The captain looked at the screen again. The creature was frantic, moving higher and higher, toward where the air was cleaner, even though the technicians clearly expected the opposite. Why is it heading for the upper floors if it's afraid of them? He asked. The junior technician swallowed nervously. Because there is less of that scent up there. Tallow turned sharply toward him. Be quiet. But it was too late. The cook was already opening one of the containers. Don't touch it, 3 locals shouted simultaneously. The lid lifted with a hiss. The warm scent of fried dough drifted through the dock once more. At that exact second, the beast on the screen lurched so violently, it was as if it had been struck by an electric current. It slammed into a side hatch. The lights on the lower level went out. Several technicians turned pale. Close it, Tallow barked. The cook slammed the lid shut. A few seconds later, the beast on the screen began to move more slowly. Not calmly, just slightly less chaotically. The captain exhaled slowly. That isn't aggression. It is a biological reaction, Tallow replied harshly. And I don't care if it's intentional or not. He was already barking new orders. Full sector isolation. The automation will seal the flows in 6 minutes. In 6 minutes, the scent will have traveled further down the shafts, the captain said. Your dampers close too slowly? The system will calculate the optimal route. The system is currently contradicting itself. Tallow stepped toward him. Are you suggesting we violate the emergency protocol? The captain looked at the map. Then, he looked at the old service niche by the wall. The cover was still loose after the last inspection. The edge of a coarse work glove protruded from inside. He pulled it out. The tech nearby grew even paler than before. Can this line be shut off manually? The captain asked. No one answered, and that was an answer in itself. Martha was the first to realize what he intended. The old dampers near the cargo shafts, are they still functional? The junior technician hesitated and said very quietly, sometimes, when the automation fails. Tallow closed his eyes for a second. It was as if he hated the very fact of this conversation. Manual access is forbidden, and the beast is about to tear through 3 more of your sectors, the captain replied. And you know it. An impact echoed from below again, this time with the crunch of metal. Tallow stared at the screen for a long time. Then he slowly stepped aside. He didn't agree. He didn't give permission. He simply stopped interfering. A minute later, the crew was already climbing into the old service corridor next to the cargo shaft. The air there was hot and smelled of the dust of old machinery. The captain pulled on the coarse glove and gripped the manual damper lever. The metal proved to be so hot that even through the thick material, his fingers cramped with pain. Above, the automation continued to flash warnings about protocol violations. Below, the creature was still thrashing through the sectors. But when the old damper finally closed the flow from the kitchen with a screech, the yellow marker on the map stopped surging upward for the first time. 3 minutes after the damper closed, the air in the corridor suddenly reversed. The captain felt it before he saw the new warnings. A hot gust hit his face from the ventilation grate, even though the system had been pulling it downward just moments ago. Then, several automatic shutters rattled above at once. One closed, another opened to meet it. It's breaking its own roots, Martha muttered. The flow diagram flashed on the wall. The lines jerked as if the city were trying to isolate the scent and push it outside simultaneously. Voices tumbled out of the general comms channel. Sector 9 has lost pressure. Upper elevator is blocked. Automation is failing to confirm its own commands. Tallow looked at the screen as if he had been expecting exactly this for a long time. How many backup lines do you have? The captain asked. Officially, none. Somewhere lower down, a dull thud echoed again. It was weaker than before, but now it was accompanied by another sound, the long screech of old dampers. Martha leaned against the wall and tiredly wiped her face. I don't like any of this. We delivered the cargo. The contract is closed. Let them deal with their own menagerie. One of the loaders nodded immediately. We'll be blamed anyway. If we wait a bit longer, they'll say the humans broke half the station with their bare hands. The captain looked down, where an old pipeline trembled beneath the service grate. It bore fresh welding marks, uneven, coarse, nothing like the local automation. He ran a finger over the metal. "This isn't factory work." Tallow remained silent. "Is your entire lower sector patched up like this?" the captain asked. "You don't need to go down there." "But the beast does?" Tallow exhaled in irritation. The city was built after the separation conflicts. The air between levels was never meant to mix, not scents, not bacteria, not habits. The system relies on isolation. Then why is it cracking now? The answer didn't come immediately. Because the old sectors weren't designed for the current loads. Marta gave a short laugh. And that's why someone is constantly fixing them by hand? The official turned to her sharply. Temporary repairs once killed far too many people. The corridor fell silent. Even the automated signals suddenly became more audible. The captain looked at the glove in his hand, thick, worn, with a scorched edge. Not a museum piece, a working one. "Then why do you still keep manual levers?" The official said nothing. New evacuation routes began flashing above. Now their sector was glowing red. "Great," the loader grunted. "Now we're officially being locked in with this smell." At that moment, the junior technician appeared from a side passage. The very one the captain had forced to go eat and get at least some sleep earlier in the shift, instead of working a double load. The tech looked around nervously. "You need to get out of here." "Where to?" Marta asked. "All the lifts are stalled." "There are service tunnels." The official tensed up instantly. "No." The tech turned pale but didn't back down. "If the automation keeps arguing with itself, the lower dampers will jam for good. Then the air will go directly through the shafts." "Do you realize what you're saying?" the official asked quietly. "Yes." He spoke almost in a whisper, as if fearing the words themselves rather than punishment. "The old lines are already being opened manually. I've seen it." The official turned away, and that was enough. A few minutes later, they were descending through a narrow tunnel between technical levels. There were no clean panels or color-coded signs here, only gray walls, the smell of dust, and pipes wrapped in old thermal insulation. The captain began noticing small details more and more. Worn mounts next to automatic locks, foreign parts that didn't match in size, tool marks under decorative casings. It was as if someone had been secretly repairing the city for years and then carefully hiding the fact of the repair itself. "They hate manual labor, don't they?" one of the loaders said softly. The tech ahead laughed nervously. "No, they hate it when people remember it." A new low sound echoed from below, not a roar, more like the tired groan of a large animal that hasn't been able to find an exit for a long time. The captain found himself no longer expecting an attack. The creature was thrashing somewhere inside this system, just like the people around it. The tunnel led them to an old observation chamber. The door opened on the third shoulder shove. Inside, it was cramped and hot. The emergency light was at half power. It was here that the captain first saw the second lever. Then, the mounts. Then, the scratches on the floor. And only then did he notice the old surveillance camera under the ceiling. The screen was still working. The image was blurry and jerky, but a figure could still be distinguished. Someone was standing by an emergency damper in a similar service corridor. In the smoke, amidst flashing lamps. With one hand, they held an overheated lever. With the other, they tried to hold the shutter, while people and aliens from the lower levels ran through the passage. The frame jerked. The figure stumbled but did not let go of the damper. The captain slowly looked at the glove in his hand. The size matched. The screen trembled so violently it was as if it were trying to forget what it was showing. The captain stepped closer. Something crunched under his sole. He shone his flashlight down and saw a thin black crust on the metal. Not rust, soot, old, ground in. A pipe ran along the wall, to which someone had once crudely attached an additional air duct. The mounts were of different sizes, the welding uneven, not factory work. On the floor nearby, a circular mark from a heavy stand. "This isn't ventilation," the captain said quietly. The technician from the lower levels, who had led them here, looked away. "No." The captain touched a circular mark with his boot. "Something was standing here." The answer came from below before the technician could speak. A deep rumble rolled up from the shaft. Everyone froze. The sound was as if a massive body were rubbing against the tunnel walls, searching for a place to press into and disappear. On the old monitor, the second surveillance channel flickered to life, an overhead view, the lower corridor by the reservoirs. The entity lay there, its side pressed against the emergency exit arch. Its forelimbs were tucked under it, its head low to the floor, massive, heavy, and motionless, except for its flanks, which were twitching too fast. It was breathing, rapidly, like a cornered animal. The captain watched the screen. Then he slowly raised his head toward the wall. Another circular mark, and another. 4 points forming a square. He exhaled. Kilns. The technician closed his eyes. Mobile ones. They were cooking here. They were heating the air for the evacuation here. The captain looked back at the screen. The beast wasn't growling. It wasn't lunging at the barriers. It was trembling. The cook, who had been silent behind his back the whole way, wiped her palms on her pants. I knew that scent was familiar to it. No one answered. The service door behind them slid aside with a heavy creak. The official entered unaccompanied. From the heat, his skin had darkened more than usual. He scanned the chamber, the screen, the traces of soot, the kiln marks, and immediately realized where he was. "You shouldn't have brought them here," he said to the technician. For the first time, the young man didn't lower his head. "It's too late now." The official was silent for a few seconds. Then he walked to the wall and ran his palm over an old seam in the air duct, as if checking if the scar was still there. "It senses fear in advance," the captain said. "That's why it was released into the crowd." The official didn't turn around. Yes. By the scent, by the chemistry of the air, sweat, overheating, breath, the release of hormones. And now it smells the scent of fried dough and panics. Yes, the cook exhaled loudly. Because back then, it was kept here next to the kilns. The official pulled his hand away from the wall. It wasn't kept nearby. It came on its own. The room fell silent. Only somewhere in the depths, an overloaded pump hummed. The captain looked at the screen, at the creature by the emergency arch, at the trembling back, and suddenly he saw the whole picture, the blocked levels, the overheated air. The crowds below, non-functional airlocks. Mobile kilns dragged right into the corridors to feed and warm people during the evacuation. The smell of hot oil, smoke, screams, and the animal that senses someone else's terror before the runners themselves do. It came to where the fear was thickest. And it got stuck inside it. "How many died?" the captain asked. The official didn't answer immediately. "Officially, few. And unofficially," the official looked at him for the first time. "Enough to delete all the records afterward." The old monitor blinked. The image jerked. For a second, the camera showed a different angle of an old recording. There were 2 people at the shutter, a human at the lever, and a second silhouette lower down, broader in the shoulders, a foreign technician in an emergency vest. He was holding the mount with his bare hands while the shutter leaf was buckling from the pressure. The frame froze. The cook stepped closer. "Is that him?" The official nodded slowly. The captain unclenched his hand. The old work glove hung from his fingers, heavy with age. It belonged to him. Yes. Why was it hidden? The official stared at the glove for a long time. Because after the accident, the city restored order. Official, clean, free of manual labor, free of mixed crews, free of shared levels. It became easier for everyone to believe that the systems had managed on their own. But they didn't. No. The captain looked at the crude welding along the pipe, at the crooked mountings, at the palm prints in the soot near the damper. The entire city was still held together by someone else's hands, which were later erased from memory. The official began to speak more softly. He worked here with the humans for 3 days, without sleep, repairing things by hand when the automation failed. He broke every protocol. After the evacuation, his name was removed from the report. It was more convenient that way. On the screen, the creature jerked sharply and struck its head against the metal of the archway. Not in rage, in a blind desire to move further away, to where there was no scent. Then it froze again. It was breathing heavily. The captain felt sweat rolling down his back. "Do they want to destroy it?" he asked. The official remained silent. That was enough. The cook cursed under her breath. The technician by the door clenched his jaw. The captain shifted his gaze to the monitor. The beast was dangerous, too big, too strong. With one movement, it could demolish half a sector. But now, he didn't see a weapon before him. He saw a living being trapped inside someone else's catastrophe. And, if it were removed now, the last witness to what this city once became, in order to survive, would vanish along with it. A red emergency stripe lit up in the corridor. A second later, a system signal to seal the levels echoed through the shafts. The official raised his head toward the ceiling. The Central Council has granted permission for the liquidation. The captain was already walking toward the door. Then we have to get there before they do. The air in the shaft suddenly rushed downward with such force that the emergency door slammed against its stopper. A second later, the flow reversed. Dust showered down from the ceiling. Somewhere deep beneath them, old dampers began to open and close simultaneously with a heavy metallic howl. The technician at the panel turned pale. The central system is trying to isolate the lower levels and simultaneously venting them into an emergency discharge. The flow diagram flickered on the wall. The red lines overlapped so densely that the map became almost black. "They've initiated the liquidation route," the official said quietly. Marta cursed and sharply closed the container with the food scraps. "Then get this smell out of here already." It had started drifting through the shafts again. The captain looked at the surveillance screen. The entity was still lying by the emergency archway. Its massive body was trembling from overheating. But now, a new sector was flashing nearby. A service tunnel leading to the old lower reservoirs. An empty level, no residential blocks, no kitchens. He tapped his finger on the diagram. "Can we vent the air there?" The technician immediately shook his head. "Only manually. The automation considers those lines dead." "Perfect. That means it won't interfere there." The official turned sharply. "If we open the old shafts now, half the dampers will jam. And if we do nothing, your hunters will drive it back into the scent." The cook was already removing the protective fasteners from the emergency lever, and it will start clawing its way back up again. The dry voice of the system came over the general channel. "Sector preparation for neutralization complete. All civilians must evacuate the lower lines." The technician swallowed nervously. "We have 10 minutes at most before the gas release." The captain looked at the official. He had been silent for too long. Right now, everything could be turned in favor of the humans. It would be enough to open the old records, show the manual seams, the chambers, the hidden tunnels. The upper floors would learn that for years, their perfect order had been maintained by those who officially did not exist. After this, the administration will no longer be able to blame the human cargo for sabotage. Marta seemed to be thinking the same thing. "If this gets out, they won't even be able to fine us." Talos slowly raised his eyes. They were tired. There was no anger, and Orion suddenly realized how easy it would be right now to finish this city off for good. Not with weapons, with the truth. A dull thud echoed from below again. On the screen, the entity tried to stand up, but immediately recoiled from a new gust of air. The smell of oil had entered the ventilation again. Orion exhaled. "You can figure out who's lying to whom later. First, get it out of here." He grabbed the work glove and pulled it onto his hand. The coarse fabric was already soaked with sweat and hot dust. "Where is the nearest manual node?" The tech answered immediately. "The third emergency collector, but the damper there is overheated." "Then let's go." They descended almost at a run. The shaft trembled beneath their feet. Several times the light failed completely, and they had to move by memory, clinging to old pipes. Marta continued to argue anyway. "If we open the flow too sharply, the scent will surge upward again. Then we open it slowly. Slowly, and the beast won't move. It will move if there is clean air ahead." "How do you know?" Orion gave her a brief look. "Because for the last half hour, that's all it's been doing." Heat met them at the bottom. Not technical heat. It was the heavy stagnant air of the old levels, where the ventilation had long been struggling to function. The damper turned out to be the size of a cargo hatch. The manual lever trembled under the strain. The tech backed away. If held for more than 2 minutes, the mechanism will warp. Talos stepped forward first. Silently, he took hold of the second latch. Marta looked at him in surprise. "You're not supposed to use your hands." "It's too late now to maintain the pretty version of history." They yanked the lever together. The metal shrieked. A blast of hot air burst from the shaft, smelling of dust, rust, and the distant dampness of an empty sector. On the portable monitor's screen, the creature raised its head. Then it slowly moved forward, not toward the people, toward the new airflow. Orion could feel his palm burning through the glove. The lever jerked as if trying to tear itself free. The automation continued to scream from above. Violation of emergency protocol. Manual intervention is prohibited. Oh, shut up already, Marta hissed. The entity on the screen moved slowly, almost by touch. Occasionally its side would bump against the walls. It would stop. It would test the air. And each time, it chose the direction where the scent of fried dough was weakest. An old shutter slammed shut with a crash in the adjacent tunnel. The floor shuddered. The tech turned pale. The left collector has buckled. Hold the pressure, Tallow barked. He was already leaning his entire weight into the mechanism. No rank, no orders, like an ordinary worker. Orion looked at him for just a second, and threw his weight against the lever again. Somewhere above, they were preparing the liquidation route. Somewhere, they were waiting for the humans to make a mistake, for the old shaft to collapse, for the creature to spiral into panic again. But none of that happened. After several agonizingly long minutes, the beast reached the empty reservoir sector. There were no residential levels there, no food, only the cold air of old storage vaults and the hum of distant pumps. The entity stopped at the open passage. It was breathing heavily. Then it slowly lay down right against the wall, far from the ventilation. And for the first time in the entire ordeal, it stopped thrashing. Tallow did not let go of the lever for nearly another minute. Only when the automation began to equalize the flows did he slowly unclasp his fingers. Dark marks from the overheated metal remained on his palms. From above, the liquidation signals no longer sounded. Only the standard emergency warnings remained. Marta sat down heavily right on the floor. If after all this they still say that humans are dangerous, I will personally feed them every bit of the remaining cargo. No one laughed. There was no strength left. Orion took off the old glove. A new dark streak had appeared on its scorched edge. The technician from the lower levels looked at it as if he were seeing an ordinary tool for the first time, rather than forbidden trash. And far above, the city was still deciding whether to consider what happened a salvation or yet another violation that too many would have to remember. The containers were being destroyed slowly, not because the process was difficult. It was simply that every batch was checked 3 times, photographed, entered into reports, and only then sent for recycling. On the screen above the dock, the official explanation was already posted. Potential contamination of air circuits, preventative measures, protection of the population. Marta read the text once and didn't look at it again. That's half the voyage, she said, watching as another container disappeared behind the flaps of the disposal airlock. Half the profits for the season. No one argued. Orion sat on an empty mounting crate and ate a cold ration. After 2 days of the emergency and running around, it was hard for him to think about politics on an empty stomach. He handed a second packet to the junior technician. The boy froze. I'm not allowed to accept gifts from those involved in the incident. Then consider it an exchange. For what? For the fact that you're still standing on your feet. The technician looked at the packaging for a few seconds, then finally took it. By evening, the Central Council's decision became official. Contacts with humans were maintained, cargo flights were maintained, but new rules appeared. Separate ventilation zones, additional filters between levels, separate kitchens for certain sectors, new inspections for odorous cargo. Marta listened to the list of restrictions with an expression as if she were being asked to voluntarily cook without spices. So, after all that, they're still afraid of food. They're afraid of a repeat, Orion replied. There isn't much of a difference. But actually, there was a difference. No one demanded the exile of humans. No one closed the port. No one spoke of sabotage. After what could have happened, that already meant a great deal. Before departure, Orion went down to the old service levels one more time, for no particular reason. He just wanted to check how things were. The shafts no longer trembled. The airflows moved steadily. Only the hum of pumps came from the empty reservoir sector. Near the emergency manifold, he noticed movement. 2 local technicians were installing a new fastener. A third was holding a panel. The fourth turned out to be a man from his own crew. They worked in silence, without orders, without official directives, just passing tools to one another. One of the technicians noticed Orion and visibly tensed up. Then he looked at the others. No one stopped. The work continued, as if it no longer required an explanation. Orion said nothing and walked on. The service compartment where the old glove had once been hidden was open. The niche cover was raised. Inside lay ordinary tools, spare fasteners, repair wrenches, and next to them, that very same coarse glove, without a case, without warning signs, without any attempt to hide it deeper. An ordinary work item among other work items. I thought it would be put away again. Talo's voice sounded behind him. Orion turned around. Talo looked even more exhausted than he had after the accident. "Does the council know?" the captain asked. "No? And if they find out?" Talo shrugged. "Then someone will say that a tool isn't being stored according to regulations." He walked over to the compartment and adjusted one of the wrenches so it wouldn't roll off the shelf. A completely mundane gesture. "Will they be questioning you about what happened?" the captain asked. "Of course. And what will you tell them?" Talo stared at the work glove for a moment. That the system fulfilled its task. Marta would have been arguing by now if she were in his place. The captain only nodded. The answer was clear. The city needed a version of events it could live with. Talo shifted his gaze to the open niche. "And some things will stay here." By the time the crew returned to the ship, the final documents had already been signed. The contract was closed. There would be no compensation. The disposal of the cargo was deemed necessary. The financial report looked hideous. The cook looked at the figures and shook her head. Donuts have never cost this much before. This time, a few people actually managed to smirk. The exhaustion began to lift. The cargo bay doors were slowly closing. Behind them remained the asteroid with its levels, filters, prohibitions, and new rules. Little had changed officially. But as the ship began to pull away from the dock, the captain noticed the familiar figure of the junior technician through the observation screen. He wasn't standing by the service entrance alone. Beside him were two workers from the upper levels and a man from the port's repair service. They were discussing something over an open panel. Then one of them reached inside with a tool. No cameras, no reports, no grand decisions. Just ordinary work. The captain leaned back in his seat. The cargo was lost. So was the profit. Yet, for the first time in the entire voyage, it didn't feel like this city looked at people as just another source of problems. Sometimes that is enough. Not for the reports, not for the contracts, for the next visit.